Alright, today we're going to do a clutch kit install on the 570 Sportsman. This one's a 2014 with the power steering and non-EBS, so it doesn't have the engine braking. But we'll do a quick run through and show you how to change the parts out real fast on it. Pretty much start by removing the seat, remove the center or the side panel here. And then this one's a little bit trickier. You gotta remove all the bolts for your footrest and slide it out of here. Sometimes it pops out nice and easy, sometimes you gotta fight it a little bit. Alright, so we loosen up the vent lines on the cover, took out all these bolts so you can pull the bolt off, or the cover off, set that aside. Then we've already done this to speed up the video, but you want to hold this. It takes a 1/2 wrench. Pull this bolt out for your secondary clutch. This is going to be your secondary clutch or driven clutch. This will be the primary clutch or drive clutch. So you pull that out. To pull this, to break this bolt loose, what you want to do is if you got a small bar or a big screwdriver, either way it works, you got to keep the clutch from rotating. And the best way to do that is stick it through there, but you don't want to, when you go through, you want to catch on the outside of the edge of the towers. You don't want to stick it through this area right here, because there's plastic pieces that slide up and down. If you damage that or scar that up, it'll wreck your primary clutch buttons and give you a lot of extra wear and tear. So you just hold it from there, it'll rotate one direction or other, and then just loosen up the bolt like you would on a normal bolt. Pull the bolt out. One other thing to watch for is when you pull this bolt out, there's usually a plastic or aluminum shim in here. Just make sure that comes out. Sometimes it stays in the clutch. If you wiggle the bolt around as you pull it out, it normally comes out with it. If you ever try to use a clutch puller and it won't go in, it's probably because this is still stuck in there. And so we got the bolt out, and then to pull the primary clutch off the machine, it's actually pressed onto the machine. So what you do is, this is a EPI clutch puller, PCP1 is the part number. Just hand thread that in there all the way. You don't want to use an impact gun or anything on it, just because it's right on the end of your crankshaft. So just want to be nice and gentle. And as you thread it in, it'll get to a point where it bottoms out, and then what you got to do is you just got to turn it and tighten it up. And as it does that, it'll butt up against the crankshaft and pop the clutch off. And I'm using the bar here to keep the clutch from rotating. Sometimes they make a big popping noise when they come off, sometimes they come right off. But there, it's loose now. And all you gotta do is thread the puller back out. And you can pull the clutches off as a unit with the belt, or you know, pull them off separately depending on what you want to do. I got everything loose here. I'm just going to try to pull the primary off first. And there's your primary clutch. It's just a taper fit on the back of that. We'll set that aside. One thing before you totally remove your belt you want to inspect and look at, as all belts should have a part number or an arrow on them. This is a stock Polaris belt on this one right now. You want it so you can read the numbers from left to right, or have the arrow going in the right direction of which way everything rotates. The biggest thing is once you take a belt off, if you're reusing that belt, make sure it goes on the same direction. So if for some reason it was on wrong or backwards the first time, make sure you put it on that way, because once it gets broken and ran that way, that's the way you need to run the belt. But then just set that off in a nice clean spot, and then your secondary clutch will come off. The thing to watch on this is sometimes on these machines there'll be washers for alignment and stuff on the back of them. Some will have some won't. And you just got to watch when you pull it off. Sometimes they'll stick to this back here, or they'll stay on the shaft. Like here, there's a couple on there, they're on the shaft still. You can see them there. If they come off, just slide them back on. Make sure they stay on there, and that'll give your clutch the right alignment when you put everything back together. Alright, so now we got your primary clutch. To change the primary spring, we're using the clutch compression tool, the CCT 510. Otherwise, on some of the ATV ones, they're soft enough where you can do it by hand if you got another person there to help you. The biggest thing is to just where you do it so it's level, so you don't cock it one way or another by loosening one side up and damage the clutch bushing at all. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to tighten this down. And another thing to watch on these is you want to mark before you take anything apart. I like to put an X on it. I'll turn it so you can see it better. I like just to put an X on the cover plate. You know, you can put it on the top or the side, and then on the tower. That way, you know, when you put it back together, it's the same way, because the Polaris ones are balanced, and so if you rotate it a third of a turn or a half a turn, it won't be balanced when you put it back together. So that's the best way to do it. Just mark it, keeps it nice and easy to keep track of. Then all you gotta do is just compress this down a little bit. Don't have to go crazy or anything. Just down a little bit like that. Once you got those bolts removed, you slowly let this out. And here's your clutch cover and your primary spring. Then before we put that back in, I'll show you how to change the weights. Once you put here's an Allen wrench or an Allen head bolt on the one side and a nut on the other, and all you gotta do is unthread it just like you would a normal bolt. And there's your weight. When you go to put a new weight in, or if you just service and clean your clutch, you want to make sure this hole is nice and round. Make sure it's not hollowed out or oval shaped at all. Same thing with your weight pin. This is a new clutch here, but as they get older and used, sometimes they'll get rusted and pitted out, or just worn out right where the weight normally is sitting there pivoting all the time. So if either one of those is worn, you want to replace them. Put the clutch back together. All you gotta do is put your weight in the weight pocket. Stick your bolt through. And put your nut back on. Same process for the other two weights. You always want to make sure it pivots nice and free, that it's not hanging up or doing anything like that. Once it moves free, put your spring back in, whatever spring you're going to use. Put that in, make sure it seats properly down in there. And put your clutch spring on, or clutch cover plate on. Make sure you got your alignment marks lined up. And then just compress it down nice and slow. Don't damage anything. Once you get to there, put your bolts in, tighten them up. Alright, so now we have the secondary clutch we're going to take apart. This one, this is under a spring tension. This aluminum hub here is called the Helix, and then there's a spring underneath that's holding tension on it now. So basically what we got to do is take this, push down on it enough so we can get the snap ring off. When we do that, it's going to pop up and it's going to rotate a little bit. If you're putting it back into, if you're pulling apart your stock one and just need to put it back together, look in these two holes here, and you should be able to see a spring sticking in one of them. You might want to mark it, that way you know which hole it was. And when it comes apart, the other tab of the spring will be in another hole. There's 1, 2, and 3 in the clutch. So just kind of pay attention before you just pull it all out. That way you know how to put it back together. So we'll quick pop it out here. Again, it doesn't go down very far. I mean, it's just a 1/16 of an inch or so, but it's enough to get the snap ring off. And then it unwinds like that. And when you pull it out, hopefully the spring stays in there. And right here, you can see there's 1, 2, and 3. This was in the number 2 hole. And so depending On our clutch kits, we'll tell you what spring position to put it back in. It's not always the same as stock, so we'll tell you that. These are yellow in this one. Some machines will be brown or black, but these are your plastic clutch buttons, they're called, and that's what the Helix slides up and down on. One other thing, when you go to put this back together, and we'll show you that too, but there's a boss spline in here. You might not be able to see it in the video, but it's an extra wide spline that the Helix will only line up one way on this clutch shaft. Alright, the trick when we put everything back together, and I'll do it without the spring so we can show it a little bit easier, is you got your points of your Helix here, and you got your plastic buttons down in there. Pretty much, you have to line this up on the splines, so once your spring's in there, you have it in there, you're going to want to push it down enough to get it started in the splines, but yet, so the plastic buttons aren't hitting this. This needs to be above those plastic buttons. And as you go, again, I'm just holding it up so it's easier to see. Say it lined up like this, and that plastic button's right there. You got to turn it so it goes past the next ramp. So if it's starting here, you want it to end somewhere on this side of the ramp. And that's usually about 1/3 of a turn or so. So you go like that, and then lock it down, and put your snap ring on. The easiest way to do that for me is I like to hold the bottom half of the clutch in place, hold the Helix in place, and turn this counterclockwise. Some people like to hold everything in place and spin the Helix. Whatever works for you, as long as you're doing it the right direction. And all clutches need that for this style of clutch. Even from the factory, it's pre-wound like that to get your right amount of spring tension and stuff on there. So if you don't do it, it's going to act really funny. It's going to be really doggy as far as backshift and throttle response, and it's going to open up too fast and bog down and slip the belt. So if you put it together and something doesn't seem right, come back and double check this. Is probably what it is. So we'll try to throw it together and show you the best we can on here. We're going to put our spring in the tabs, and I'll try to do it myself. Sometimes it's nice to have another person there to help you. Sometimes the clutch press works and sometimes it doesn't, but just trying to line up the boss splines for us. So I got that going, get that started. Now I'm just gonna, if I can, turn it past, get it down. Alright, so I'm just bending this tab back so it's flat. And it's just a matter of sitting it on there and then pushing it down far enough to where the snap ring can go on. The other thing I did do is I put a light coat of grease on there. You don't want to go crazy with it on the splines of the Helix. That way when it comes apart, if you disassemble it later on, it'll work easier that way for your maintenance and stuff like that. When you get all of a sudden done, take a clean rag and just wipe all the extra stuff off. You don't want the grease to get on your belt or anywhere else on your clutches. It's just mainly to lubricate those splines a little bit. And once you do that, you're good to go. Another way to check it is when you wind up your clutch, if you hold this part and grab the back part of it, it should spin and it should have tension on it. And it should try to wind itself back shut. Alright, so we're going to put everything back together now. Clean the clutches, put them back on, slide this back on. Make sure if you've removed any of these shims or washers back here, make sure you put those back in place so their alignment's good. Slide that on. And we'll just do a quick overview so you know how to do it, but you tighten this bolt up. And what I like to do is make sure you got the belt so it's reading the right direction, so you can read it from left to right. Put that in your clutch, and on this style, you can hold the clutch and turn it. That'll get the clutch or the belt down into it. Sometimes you can just grab onto them and squeeze a little bit. Oops. As you turn it backwards and rotate it backwards, you can get the belt down in there. And that normally gives you enough to get the primary clutch on. Otherwise, you can put the belt around both of them and slide them on as a unit too. Then you grab your primary clutch, put that on like that. Grab your bolt, make sure you got all your spacers and your washers on there. And you want to just tighten this up. On this particular one, you just tighten it to factory specs. Again, how to do that is grab a big screwdriver or small bar. You want to keep it from rotating. And just tighten up to torque specs, and that kind of presses itself back on there. And once you got this tight, you're pretty much good to go. Alright, so now we got the clutches on. Before you put the clutch cover on, what you want to do is, on ours, this one's come apart pretty easily. It's a two-piece system here that's kind of held together with a rubber boot, and it's kind of zip tied on. Just make sure that hasn't come apart, especially if you're doing any water riding and stuff like that. You want that sealed up good. And then by the time when you get everything assembled, just double check that again too to make sure it's all good. But then it's just a matter of getting your clutch cover on, which is, you got to fight with it a little bit here and there to get it popped into place. And once you do that, then it's a matter of getting your, hook up your front and rear vent lines, put your footrest on, check your vents up here, put your side panel and sheet on, and you're ready to ride.